I close by saying I'm still convinced that it's not a typical human deformity, that lab made a mistake, but until I can get, until there's another test done on it, we're not going to know for sure. Within a few days, a woman named Belinda McKenzie in London contacted me and said that her father had died recently. She had come into an inheritance. She had some money now, and what would it cost to get that second DNA test, that confirming test, to know one way or the other for sure that she had followed my story for some time, and she wanted to know the answer, the real true answer, whatever it was. And that's really all I wanted, just a real true answer that we could believe in. So I didn't know where we stood at the time in terms of ancient DNA labs, but I went right to work. I said, I'll get you a number as soon as I know what it is. And so I found that there were 24 labs now in the world in 203 that were able to do ancient DNA recovery. And so I took those labs and I started calling them, and I found one, Trace Genetics in California, that was willing to do the work, run by two young men named Rip and Molly and Jason Eshelman. And they just said, look, we'll do it. We don't care. We don't have a dog in the fight. It's just business to us. We'll, you pay your money, we'll tell you what it is, we'll get you a result, and you can count on it. We are a certified ancient DNA lab. We we worked on the Kennewick man. We'll get you an answer, don't worry. I said, great, but I'm not going to turn the skull just over and walk away the way I did in Canada, because I got shafted that way. If you don't mind, I'm going to hang around and see what you do. And it's fine, stay as long as you want. No problem, we have nothing to hide here. My girlfriend and I brought the skulls to the lab and met them and talked to them, and we just found them to be delightful young men, and they were just absolutely dedicated to getting the answer, whatever it was. They didn't care up or down, they were going to do a good job. So we went in, they were prepared to do the cutting of the first bone samples out of it, the samples that they were going to use, and they were going to take pieces out of the parietal. Now keep in mind that the Canadian lab had already taken several pieces off the Starchild and only one piece off the human, because its DNA for the Canadian lab came up perfectly the first time as human, as a normal human nuclear DNA, easy to recover. But the 4 attempts for the Starchild, the 2 contaminations and the 2 claimed 200 weak response picograms, and so those 4 samples were gone. So they were going to cut a window, a square part out of the parietal right here, and they were going to cut a part out of the parietal here, because the Canadian lab had taken the condyles out of here. So when they set up, they cut with what's called a Dremel blade, and it looks kind of like a flashlight with a spike sticking out the end of it, and attached to that spike is a circular blade like this, about 1 inch wide, 1.25 inches maybe, and it spins very, very fast. When they turn that motor on, it's a high-speed, small rotary blade to cut through the bone. So what he did was, what Jason did, he's standing there with his coat and his protective glasses on, and he cuts through with 4 cuts. Zoom, 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 and a piece, 1 square inch, falls out, down, comes out the neck hole, and there it is. Then he cuts that square inch into 4 pieces, and those little 1/4 inch pieces are what they work with. Now, comes the Starchild's turn. Puts it up, locks it in the thing that braces it and all that, and he puts the Dremel blade down on it, whereas before it just went whoop, right in. He did that same thing, and he went whoop, boop, and when the blade hit the bone, it kind of bounced up and made kind of a boop sound. And Jason looked over at Rip and like, what was that? And looked at me. I didn't know. But then I remembered that when I was talking to one of the Canadian guys, when they had worked on it years before, he had said, this bone is so hard, we could hardly get the tooth out. This bone is really hard. Well, at the time, that just flew right over my head. I didn't follow up on it like I should have. But now, we were seeing what that meant. This was really, you would think the Canadian lab would have made more to do about it because they cut a lot of it, and they should have said more than just a kind of a passing thing. This is hard. But again, they were students. So they were like me. They didn't have enough experience to know. But Jason and Ripon had cut a lot of bone in their career, so they knew what they were looking at. So this time he really pressed hard, and he went, and boy, this time the bone powder had flown a little bit with here, and the smell of burning collagen, which is the smell you get when you drill your teeth, that distinctively bad odor, we got a little of that out of the human, a normal amount. With the Starchild, bone powder flew, and the stink was overwhelming. I mean, the stink of the burning collagen was unreal bad. But Jason was able to struggle through his 4 cuts, and when the piece of, and you could already see from other cuts that the bone of the Starchild was a lot thinner. And it is. It's about half as thin or less than human bone. It weighs half as much, that distinctive lightness to it. And it was turning out that the bone was 2 or 3 times as hard. It was hard, even though it was much thinner. So when he cut it out, we were just running for the windows and the door to get air into the room because of that stink in the powder that it had thrown up. And he cut that 1-inch piece, same thing, fell out the neck hole, and he cut it into 4 pieces. And when it was all done, he said, look, this bone is very, very different than human bone. You really need to find out more about the bone itself. First time I'd heard that. He said, he gave me one of those little 1/4-inch pieces in a test tube, and he said, take this and find out what you can about it. Meanwhile, we're going to do the DNA that we told you about. Okay. So I ended up going to London for a year to stay with Belinda and use the help of English scientists to find out, many more things about the bone. But in the meanwhile, they were working on the DNA. Now, the way you do it, the way you recover it, or the way you did it then was, you took the human bone, you took the little chip, the little piece, and you put it in a test tube, and you put a liquid, you covered it in a liquid called EDTA. And EDTA, you take that test tube and you put it in what's called a rocker arm, which is a machine that does this for just 24/7. It never stops once you start it. So they put it in the rocker arm in the EDTA, and a week later, human bone is reduced down to nothing. It's part of the liquid now. The EDTA has reduced it to liquid, and in there is the DNA, the strands of DNA, and that's when you begin the process of working with it. With the Starchild piece of bone, they put in the same kind of test tube, different one of course, but in another rocker arm. And in 1 week, there was absolutely no change. 2 weeks, no change. A month, no change. 2 months. I think they let it run for 3 months before they just finally turned it off because it had not changed at all. Meanwhile, after a couple of weeks went by and they realized it wasn't working, they let me know, we have a detergent here, a very powerful detergent called Tween 20 that will dissolve stone. And we're going to put it in that and see what happens. And sure enough, one night in the rocker arm with Tween 20 and it was dissolved. The Starchild bone was dissolved. But it was like a rock, not like a human. So again, this was more of, this bone is very unusual. You really need to find out about this bone. So when they began the process of recovering the 2 things that they were able to recover, which is mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA. Now, it's important to understand the difference between those 2 things. In all of our cells, except our blood cells and brain cells, but in the normal cells of our body, we have the outer wall, and then there's a nucleus in here. Floating between the outer wall and the nucleus is what's called cytoplasm. And floating in the cytoplasm are little pieces that are called mitochondria, little power plants, mitochondria. And those are each about a little more than 16,000 base pairs long. But the mitochondria float in here, and there are a lot of them, about 16,000 base pairs each. Now, base pairs are what make up all of life everywhere is made up of 4 nucleotides that pair up into into two base pairs, and these two base pairs in combination go out for millions and billions to make up genomes. The base pairs make up genes, genes make up chromosomes, chromosomes make up the entire genome of a living being, and that's in the nucleus of all of our cells. It's incredible how it works. But the basic unit, the basic brick, are these four nucleotides combined to make the base pairs, and everybody counts in terms of base pairs. So that's what I mean by 16,000 base pairs in the mitochondria. In the nucleus is all of the genome, the 23 chromosomes that come from your mother, the 23 chromosomes that come from your father. The mitochondria come only from your mother. So your mother contributes all of the mitochondria and half of the genome, half of what's in the nucleus. She contributes her 23 chromosomes, the male contributes his 23 chromosomes with no mitochondria from the male. So all of us have the mitochondria of our mothers, male or female, we have the mitochondria of our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, our great-great-grandmothers, our great-great-great-great-grandmothers, and right on back as far as you care to go. We have the female mitochondria because it comes down in the egg. Sperm carry no mitochondria. So we were looking for two things. We were looking for the mitochondrial DNA of both the human skull and the Starchild skull, and we were trying to determine the nuclear DNA of the human and the Starchild. This was key. Could we recover, and if we could, what did it tell us? So they went after the mitochondrial DNA of the human first, and the first attempt, easy recovery, bright and clear in the gel sheets, indicating very little degradation, which is what the Canadians had found when they recovered her nuclear DNA as well. First attempt, no problem. It's there, no real significant degradation. So what it came out as, the mitochondrial DNA, she was from haplogroup A. She, her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, all from haplogroup A, which is a typical Mesoamerican group from Mexico. Absolutely nothing unusual about that. Now, they went after the Starchild's mitochondrial DNA. And when they did that, again, a very easy recovery, first attempt, and they found that its mother and its grandmother and great-grandmother and right on back had been from haplogroup C, another kind of Mesoamerican. Now, this told us a few significant things, one of which was the Starchild had a human mother. Otherwise, the mitochondrial DNA would not have connected, would not have shown up with the primers that were in use in 2003. Primers were long strings of human-made base pairs, strings made by humans of base pairs, a few thousand long. And they were like chemical keys, where you'd put them into the mix of the human only, you put them into human DNA, those keys find the locks that match up, and there's only a couple dozen of these keys, a couple dozen primers that they would use to tell them everything they needed to know. So they would lock up and that would be it. So the mitochondrial locked up and showed that human haplogroup A, human haplogroup C. So the Starchild has a human mother. Also, we found out they were not related. Now, up until then, we had believed they were related. We had believed that it was probably a mother and a child because the scene that the girl described of the death, the burial far away in an obscure mine tunnel, and then the suicide with the hand wrapped around the arm showing the emotional bond, the emotional connection, indicated to us mother and father. Plus, by then, we had been told about the Mesoamerican and ancient American legends called the star being legends of star beings coming from the sky to find, now this is in ancient times, to find in a tribe a woman who was barren, who had no children or had no husband and no other children to take care of, and she would be made pregnant.